There is a lot that Star Wars can learn from Dune. The Dune influences on Star Wars are numerous. Desert planet, special wizards, controlling someone with your voice, giant worms in the desert, chosen ones, destroying the like button for the YouTube algorithm, and plenty more. Star Wars has obviously been more pop culturally relevant since 1977, but that doesn't mean there isn't a lot you can learn. Dune is a worldwide success, some calling it the next Lord of the Rings or the next Star Wars. Now this is a bit disingenuous because Dune is nothing like Star Wars. Star Wars is fun, light-hearted, fantastical, and overall simple. Dune is serious, dark, pure science fiction, and overall very complicated. But there is one thing that these two franchises share in common, and that is the lore. Both universes have lore so rich and deep that you could read about it for hours and still only scratch the surface. While Star Wars has 11 movies, 5 shows, a bunch of video games, and hundreds of books and comics, Dune has 6 main books and a dozen or so spin-off books, along with a few attempts at a live-action adaptation. Denis Villeneuve's Dune has been critically acclaimed as a near-perfect adaptation of the first half of just the first book. So since this movie is such a success, what exactly can Star Wars learn from it? If there is one takeaway from this entire video, it's that Lucasfilm should not be afraid to get weird. While I thoroughly enjoy a lot of the Star Wars content recently, I can't help but notice that a lot of it is safe. All of the new movies besides The Last Jedi really don't try anything new with the lore or concepts of Star Wars. I mean, sure, the sequels added new Force abilities, but I wouldn't consider that super inside baseball. The closest Star Wars has come to really introducing some weird shit with its live action stories was with The Rise of Skywalker, but even there it was half-assed. Canonically, Palpatine was able to transfer his essence into a clone body, a body that wasn't even strong enough to host the strength of his soul. This is some weird shit that I like from Star Wars, but the movie decides to stray away from it because it would be too nerdy or too confusing for the casual audience. Some of you may bring up all the weird shit that goes on in Clone Wars and Rebels, and I would totally agree with you. The Mortis arc is a consensus top 3 arc in all of the series, and it's the weirdest that show has ever gotten. Rebels introduced the world between worlds, which is still very relevant today. While these shows do that weird stuff that I love from Star Wars, Lucasfilm seems to reserve that weird stuff for its animated projects. The Mandalorian may go in that direction with its cloning and the potential to tie into Palpatine, so we'll see if I'm wrong there. But Dune is proof that you can have really weird shit and still have a casual audience enjoy the movie. Let's look at the Fremen, for example. The Fremen are a civilization of people that live on the desert planet Arrakis that has absolutely 0% precipitation. To survive, they wear these still suits that absorb almost all the water that leaves their body and recycle it into drinking water so they don't die. To survive against these giant sandworms that live in the desert, they have created these devices that distract the worms so they can travel across the desert. Because the sandworms are hyper aware of the human gait, the Fremen walk without a pattern to trick the sandworms. Also, since these people basically live in the wild and in a few underground cities, the way they see the world is vastly different than the way others do. They have their own religion, their own language, their own laws and morals, their own customs, their own prophecies. All of this detail is used to describe one group of people, and they are probably the most interesting aspect of the Dune universe. While Star Wars definitely has its own cultures that it's explored, I'm not sure if any of them are as detailed or in fact as original as the Fremen and the other cultures of Dune. The closest we have to that are probably the Mandalorians, but almost all of that world building is done in the Clone Wars and Rebels shows, not so much in the actual Mandalorian show. You could argue that the Jedi are also super fleshed out, and while that may be true, the movies barely touch on any of that. And I understand why this is the case. George Lucas took inspiration from a lot of different groups of people, so it makes sense that the cultures we see in Star Wars are similar to the cultures in our own world. But I want to challenge Lucasfilm to really create something that is super weird but super detailed and fleshed out. Let's look at the book of Boba Fett, for example. Boba Fett is likely going to go on some sort of crusade to gain power from the vacuum that was left from Jabba the Hutt's death. We have seen mobsters and gangsters and criminals in Star Wars so many times, it's kind of boring at this point. In this show, I want to see some some serious world building with the underworld. I want to see different syndicates fighting for power, and each of these different syndicates are distinct from each other in terms of design, fighting style, and culture. What are their leaders like? How do they rule? What are their followers like? These are some really interesting questions. Look at the Clone Wars, for example. There was the Pikes, Crimson Dawn, Black Sun, Death Watch, and plenty of other syndicates that were vastly different from each other. I really hope Boba Fett does something similar with his show. World building within world building. Now, you may call my hopes and dreams unrealistic because when shit gets really weird and really inside baseball, it doesn't make as much money as the stuff that's simple. Look at The Force Awakens. It's as simple as Star Wars can get, and it's still the highest grossing movie domestically of all time. So do these simple stories make more money? Yes and no. In terms of immediate returns, a safer story like The Force Awakens will definitely bring you more money than a weirder story. But people who make this claim fail to take into account the long-term investment of rich storytelling. While these stories with deeper lore tend to not produce as much revenue immediately, they lead to a more devoted fan base, and I would argue that is more important. A story with steep lore will leave fans wanting more. They will be more tempted to buy the reference guides or any of the other ancillary material because they want to learn more. It's the reason why Star Wars has such a devoted fan base. The original trilogy are beloved movies, but it made people want to learn more. So they bought the books, the reference guides, the toys, they watched the other shows, they watched the documentaries, and subscribed to amazing YouTube channels. And there are still plenty of other ways to get involved with the Star Wars fandom. With Star Wars, there is so much to dive into that it leads to such a devoted fan base. Let's compare James Cameron's Avatar to Attack of the Clones. I think most people can agree that James Cameron's Avatar is a better movie. So say a fan really loves that movie and they want to learn more. They may watch some interviews, maybe some behind the scenes stuff, and that's it. After a day, they've consumed everything that is Avatar. But let's look at Attack of the Clones. Say someone watches that movie and really loves it. To learn more, they may buy the novelization, then they'll buy the reference guides, then they'll read the Clone Wars comics and books that continue on the plot of Attack of the Clones. Then they may start watching either one of the Clone Wars shows. Then they may join a prequel subreddit where there are discussions about the prequels all the time. You could consume content related to Attack of the Clones for days and there will still be something new you can learn. So while Avatar killed Attack of the Clones in the box office, I wouldn't be surprised if Attack of the Clones overall has led to a higher return on investment than Avatar has. Dune, I think, is more akin to Star Wars in that respect than James Cameron's Avatar. Dune may not have the reach that the Avatar movie had, but it will lead to a more hardcore fan base, and that's where the real money is made. So Star Wars should implement this more. You can only go so far with stories that have to do with the Empire or the Republic, and I think that the Book of Boba Fett is the first story, both live action and animated, that can be completely isolated from the main threats of the Skywalker saga. Actually, Solo didn't really have much to do with the Empire, and look what spawned from it. Crimson Dawn came from it, which already has huge implications on certain parts of the canon. Darth Maul might get his own show that has to do with Crimson Dawn. If Star Wars continues to introduce new pieces of lore, I think they have a bright future ahead of them. And that's what Star Wars can learn from Dune. See you guys!